From betrayal to redemption, from the streets to a new family. This is proof that love can rise from the ashes. Tell us in the comments what you think. If you were Naomi, would you have trusted Isaac? And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. I always believed my life was measured in contracts, balance sheets, and the steel towers that bore my company's name. In Lagos, success is loud. It shouts through the roar of traffic, through billboards of faces that want to be remembered, through the endless fight for power. I had built my name in that noise, learned to carry myself like someone who could not be broken. But fate is not impressed by resumes, and it does not knock politely. It crashes without warning. That night it wore the face of a stranger I had never seen before. The rain had been falling hard, turning the streets into rivers. I was returning from a meeting restless, the kind of restless that no amount of wealth can calm. My driver had insisted I sit in the back of the Jaguar, but impatience had made me reckless. I had taken the wheel myself, as though control over a machine could soothe the unease inside me. The road ahead gleamed black, narrow, treacherous. I was 2 streets away from the estate gates when it happened. A figure stumbled out of the darkness. At first I thought it was just another desperate man trying to cross, but then his body moved in a way that made no sense. Straight toward my car, arms outstretched like a barrier. The Jaguar skidded. Tires screamed. I remember the sound of metal scraping the edge of the ditch that waited beside the road, the tilt of the world as if we were about to roll. And then impact. A body against the hood sliding down, crumpling onto the wet asphalt. I froze. For a moment I could not breathe. My hands clutched the wheel, knuckles white, heart pounding so loudly I thought the world could hear it. When I stumbled out of the car, the rain hit me like shards of glass. He lay there, a man dressed in rags, his chest rising weakly, blood mixing with the water that rushed along the gutter. His eyes fluttered open once, just long enough for me to see the exhaustion etched into his face. Then they closed. The headlights illuminated everything, the torn shirt, the bare feet, the broken body of someone who had clearly been surviving more than living. My guards arrived seconds later, shouting, urging me to step back, calling for the ambulance. But I knelt beside him, my suit soaked, my voice trembling in a way it had not trembled since childhood. "Stay with me," I whispered, though I had no idea who he was. No reason to care other than the unbearable thought that this man had thrown himself under my car and I could not let him vanish as if he had never existed. When the paramedics lifted him, I heard one of them murmur, "Lucky." Another second and the ditch would have swallowed her car. The words pierced me. I realized with chilling clarity, he had not simply fallen. He had pushed himself into danger to keep me from it. He had given his body to stop the Jaguar from sliding over the edge. At the hospital they told me his name, Isaac, and that his chances were uncertain. Severe head trauma, blood loss, bones shattered. I stood by the glass watching machines breathe for him. In all my years of commanding boardrooms, I had never felt so powerless. And yet, as I watched his chest rise and fall, I knew one thing with certainty. This man, a homeless stranger who should have been invisible in the city's chaos, had tied his fate to mine. And whether he lived or died would change everything I thought I knew about control. That night I whispered to myself, if he survives, I will not walk away. But when dawn came and the doctors shook their heads, saying his body was fighting a war it might not win, I realized I had already stepped onto a road from which there would be no turning back. Hospitals have a way of stripping you bare, no matter how much wealth or influence you carry with you through the doors. My heels clicked against linoleum instead of marble, my tailored dress smelled of antiseptic instead of perfume, and every look the nurses gave me was the same. They had seen too many families pacing the same corridors, too many promises whispered to machines. But I was not family, I had no blood tie to the man behind the glass. Still I remained. Isaac lay on the bed, his chest rising in a rhythm owned not by him but by the machines surrounding him. Bandages wrapped around his head, and 4 dripping slow salvation into his veins, and yet there was something stubborn in the way his fingers twitched, as if life itself had refused to release him. The doctor, a tired man with gray at his temples, pulled me aside. His words were clinical but they struck like blows. Severe trauma. Even if he survives, recovery will be long, uncertain, expensive. He studied me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Are you sure you want to cover all of this?" He has no records, no relatives, nothing. He is nobody. The word nobody hit harder than I expected. I straightened my shoulders, let my voice drop into the tone that once silenced entire boardrooms. He is not nobody. He saved my life. Put every cost under my account. No questions. The doctor nodded reluctantly, as if still puzzled why a woman whose name graced skyscrapers would claim a stranger bleeding on the street. For days I sat by his bed. Meetings were postponed, investors whispered about my absence, but I could not leave. I watched his face for signs of movement, listened for the smallest change in the beeping that dictated our hours. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, I spoke to him though I knew he could not hear me. Why did you do it? Why would a man with nothing risk himself for me? Who were you before the streets took you? No answer came, only the hum of the ventilator. On the fifth night, when exhaustion made my eyelids heavy, I heard a sound. A groan, rough and broken but real. My head snapped up and I saw his lips move. The nurse rushed in, adjusting tubes, calling the doctor, but I leaned closer, desperate to hear. Isaac, I whispered, you're safe. You're alive. His eyes fluttered open, dark irises clouded with confusion. He looked at me as if I were a stranger in his dream. Who am I? The words cracked like dry earth. The question froze me. The doctor explained later that memory loss was common, that his mind had likely erased itself in defense against pain. But in that moment, when he stared at me with desperation, I felt a strange shiver. He truly didn't know. His identity was gone, stripped as brutally as his dignity had been before the accident. I don't know your story, I told him softly, my throat tight, but you're not alone anymore. He closed his eyes again, tears seeping from the corners, and I realized then that my life had shifted. This wasn't charity, wasn't obligation, it was something deeper, a pull I could not explain. Every morning after, I returned to his side. I fed him soup when his hands trembled, read him the news when silence weighed too heavily, and ignored the calls from shareholders demanding my attention. To them, he was just a nameless man taking up resources. To me, he had become the center of my days, the question that refused to be ignored. And slowly, though he could not remember the man he once was, I began to feel the bond of someone new, the man he was becoming before my eyes. The doctors had warned me that memory might come back in fragments, an image here, a phrase there, perhaps a nightmare that would make no sense at first. For weeks I prepared myself for that moment, telling myself I would be calm, that I would anchor him if the storm of the past broke through his fragile silence. Yet when it happened, there was nothing calm about me. It was early morning, the hour when the city is still half asleep, when the hospital corridors smell of disinfectant and stale coffee. I sat by his bed, reviewing contracts on my tablet, pretending I still had one foot in the empire waiting outside these walls. Isaac shifted suddenly, his hand clenching the blanket. His breath quickened, his lips murmuring broken words. At first I thought it was just another restless dream, but then his voice rose raw with anguish. I didn't betray them. I didn't. I dropped the tablet, my heart racing. I leaned closer, gripping his hand. Isaac, look at me. You're safe. It's just a memory. His eyes snapped open wide, terrified, as if he had been dragged from a battlefield. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He stared at me, searching, and whispered hoarsely, They framed me. In halting bursts, as if each word cost him breath, pieces began to fall into place. He had not always been a man sleeping under bridges. Once he had been a software engineer, one of the brightest in his company. He spoke of lines of code that came to him like music, of projects that could have changed the industry. But envy is sharper than hunger, and betrayal cuts deeper than poverty. His colleagues, he said, had accused him of leaking secrets, of sabotaging the very work he had built. Lies spread like fire. Within months he was in prison, condemned by the very system he had trusted. My chest tightened as he described it. Nights behind bars, the cold silence of a cell, the letters from his wife that grew shorter until they stopped coming altogether. His marriage shattered. His little boy taken far away. By the time the truth surfaced, by the time whispers of his innocence finally reached the air, he had lost everything. Released with no apology, no compensation, no family waiting. Only the streets opened their arms. He broke down then, covering his face with his hands, as though shame were a second skin he could never tear away. I wanted to speak, to comfort him, but the words lodged in my throat. What do you tell a man who has survived injustice so total it has erased his very identity? Instead, I touched his hand gently. You are not alone anymore. They may have buried you once, but you're here now. With me. For a long time he said nothing. Then, slowly, he lowered his hands, his eyes meeting mine with a kind of broken honesty I had never seen in any boardroom. Why are you here, Naomi? Why would a woman like you waste her time on a man like me? I could have given him the simple answer, that he had saved my life on that road. But deep inside I knew it was more. I saw in him the same wound I carried, though carved by different knives. I whispered. Because sometimes the world destroys us not to end us, but to test if we can rise again. And maybe we were meant to rise together. His lips trembled with something between gratitude and disbelief. He turned his face toward the ceiling, silent tears running into his hair. I stayed beside him, holding his hand until sleep finally reclaimed him. That night, as I drove back to the estate, the city lights flashing against the windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that his story was more than a confession. It was a mirror. For the first time in years, I wondered if my own wounds, the betrayals, the humiliations, the scars of love turned to ash, were leading me here to him. And I knew. Isaac's past had returned, but so would mine. The more Isaac remembered, the more the silence between us began to ache. He had bared his shame, his fall from grace, his broken family. I listened, I comforted, but all the while a voice whispered inside me. You owe him the truth of your own scars. For days I resisted. What good would it do to drag him through the wreckage of my past? Yet every time his eyes searched mine, I felt the weight of secrets pressing harder against my chest. One evening, when the rain hammered the glass of his hospital window and the world seemed smaller than the four walls around us, I finally let the words come. Isaac, I began, my voice low. You think I am a woman who has everything. Money, power, control. But that is not the whole truth. I too have been broken. I too have been betrayed. His gaze sharpened, steady despite the weariness still etched on his face. I drew in a breath, and with it came memories I had buried beneath the steel and glass of my empire. Years ago, I was married to a man named David. He was my first love, or so I believed. I trusted him with everything. My heart, my future. The fortune left to me when my parents died. And with that trust, he did what betrayers always do. He stole. The word hung in the air like a blade. I told Isaac how David had emptied accounts, sold properties behind my back, siphoned every drop of inheritance into his own schemes. He had disappeared one morning, leaving me with nothing but debts and ridicule. The city's elite whispered that I was foolish, unworthy of the Ajayi name. A woman who had squandered her legacy because she chose the wrong man. They laughed at me in boardrooms, shut doors in my face, and said I was finished. Isaac's hand tightened weakly around mine. I forced myself to continue. But I did not stay finished. I rebuilt from the ground up. I clawed my way into every meeting that tried to exclude me. Took contracts they swore I couldn't handle, turned rejection into fire. That is how Agitech was born. Not from privilege, not from ease, but from rage. From survival. For a long time he said nothing. His eyes glistened with the same rawness I had seen when he spoke of prison. Then hoarsely he whispered. So they broke us both. I nodded, my throat tight. Yes. Different ways, same wound. We sat in silence. Not the heavy silence of strangers, but the fragile quiet of two people recognizing themselves in each other's pain. I realized then that pity was not what I felt for him, nor gratitude alone. It was kinship. We were survivors cut from the same torn fabric. And in that recognition, something began to shift inside me. A dangerous, unspoken closeness that neither of us dared name. When I rose to leave that night, Isaac's voice stopped me at the door. Naomi, he murmured. Maybe betrayal is the reason we met. Maybe we were meant to prove that broken doesn't mean destroyed. His words followed me into the night, echoing louder than the storm outside. For the first time in years, I felt that the wound I carried was not mine alone to bear. But as much as that realization comforted me, it also frightened me. Because when two broken lives intertwine, The world does not stay silent. Shadows of the past always wait for their moment to return. When the doctors finally agreed Isaac was strong enough to leave the hospital, I made a decision that startled even me. I could have arranged a modest apartment, hired a nurse, kept my involvement distant and professional. That would have been sensible, clean. But as I looked at him, still frail, yet with a fire reawakening in his eyes, I knew I could not let him vanish back into the shadows of Lagos. "Come with me," I said simply. "To my estate. You will be safe there." His protest came immediately. "Naomi, I have nothing. No past, no dignity, no future. I can't live under your roof like a charity case." His voice cracked with pride, but behind it was fear. I met his gaze without flinching. "This isn't charity. This is a beginning. You gave me my life. Let me give you yours back." For a long time he was silent, his jaw tight, and then he nodded, reluctant, resigned, but with the faintest spark of trust. The estate was a world away from the pavements he had known. Gates opened to manicured gardens, fountains glimmered in the sun, and the house rose like a fortress of glass and stone. Yet when I let him inside, I saw no awe on his face. Instead, there was unease, as if he feared the walls might collapse on him. "All this," he whispered, "feels like a dream someone else should be living." I placed a hand on his arm. "Then claim it. Dreams are not for the chosen few. They're for those who survive long enough to seize them." In the days that followed, I brought him into Agitech, my company, the empire I had built from betrayal's ashes. I introduced him not as a charity project but as a consultant, someone whose eyes I trusted. The engineers smirked behind their tablets, whispering that the boss had grown sentimental. But when Isaac's hands touched a keyboard, the room itself seemed to hold its breath. Code poured from him like music, his fingers dancing across keys with a precision that silenced the doubters. A system bug that had stalled the team for weeks collapsed under his gaze in less than an hour. "You see numbers," he told them calmly, "but I hear rhythm. And your rhythm was broken." The room fell silent, their pride bruised, but their respect undeniable. I watched him astonished. The man who had once begged for scraps on the street was suddenly commanding the attention of my brightest minds. His back straightened, his eyes lit with the joy of rediscovered purpose. Each day he grew stronger, not just in body but in spirit. And though he did not say it aloud, I could see the gratitude in the way he looked at me. Gratitude mixed with something deeper, something unspoken. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the skyline, he turned to me after a long day in the lab. "You've given me more than a second chance, Naomi. You've given me back myself." His voice trembled, and for a moment I felt the dangerous pull of emotion too close to love. I forced a smile, hiding the storm inside me. "Second chances," I told him softly, "belong only to the strong." But even as I spoke, a shadow flickered at the edge of my thoughts. Because second chances have a way of provoking those who prefer the past to stay buried. And I knew with chilling certainty that not everyone would welcome Isaac's rebirth. I had almost convinced myself that life was finally steady, that perhaps fate had tired of throwing storms into my path. Isaac was thriving at Agitech, the team that once doubted him now leaned on his brilliance, and the estate no longer felt like a cage but a home where laughter had begun to echo in places long silent. But life has a cruel habit. It waits for the moment your guard lowers before it bares its teeth. And for me, that cruelty had a name. I once spoke with love. David. It began with whispers. A shareholder who claimed to have seen him in Abuja. A former colleague who mentioned his return to Lagos. A rumor in the financial press about a mystery investor circling my company. I brushed them aside at first, unwilling to let ghosts unsettle me. Yet the tension in my chest told me otherwise. Betrayal never really dies. It lingers, waiting to reappear with a different mask. The truth revealed itself one night when I arrived home late. Isaac was in the library, immersed in documents, his brow furrowed. I poured myself a glass of water and was about to join him when the intercom buzzed. "Madam Ajayi," the guard said nervously. "There is a man outside. He says he knows you. He says his name is David." The glass slipped from my hand, shattering across the floor. Isaac looked up instantly, rushing to me. "Naomi? What is it?" His concern only deepened my dread. I could barely form the words. "He's here." Against every instinct, I told them to let him in. And there he was, stepping into my estate as if the years had been nothing but a pause in his performance. He was older, yes, but not weaker. His smile still carried that intoxicating charm that once blinded me. His tailored suit still announced arrogance before he even spoke. "Naomi," he said smoothly, spreading his arms. "You look magnificent." I stood tall, though inside my stomach twisted. "You have no right to be here." He chuckled, glancing around the room as if admiring a prize that should have been his. "On the contrary, I have every right. I built part of this life with you. Don't forget that." Isaac stepped forward then, his voice steady but edged with warning. "You built nothing. You stole. And you left her to clean the ruins." For a moment David's mask slipped. His eyes narrowed, filled with venom as they landed on Isaac. "And who are you? The stray she picked up from the streets? Be careful how loudly you bark, dog, before you forget whose house you're in." Rage flared inside me, but I kept my voice sharp and cold. "This is my house, David. My company. My life. You forfeited every claim the day you abandoned me." His smirk returned, though his eyes betrayed fury. "We'll see about that. Lagos loves a good scandal, Naomi. Let's see how long your investors stand by you once they learn who you've been sheltering under your roof." He threw a final glance at Isaac, dripping with malice. "The world has a way of crushing men like you. I'll make sure of it." When he left, slamming the door behind him, Isaac turned to me, his jaw tight. "He won't stop, Naomi. I know men like him. When they return, they come for blood." I wanted to reassure him, to say that David's threats were nothing but noise. But in my heart I knew better. Shadows had returned, and they carried the face of a man who once knew every weakness I had. That night I lay awake, listening to Isaac's breathing in the next room, and felt the old wound throb again. The past had come back, and it would not leave quietly. I had known David would not simply vanish after his reappearance. Men like him never leave quietly. They return like storms, destroying everything in their path until you have nothing left but ruin. Still, even with that knowledge heavy in my chest, I was not prepared for how quickly he would strike. The evening had been ordinary, or as ordinary as life had become with Isaac by my side. We were in the Agitech lab, long after most of the staff had gone home. Isaac had been explaining a new algorithm, his eyes glowing with the same passion that once built his career before it was stolen from him. I remember laughing, real laughter, the kind I had not felt in years. It felt dangerous, almost indulgent, to imagine that peace might finally be possible. Then the lights flickered. A power surge, brief but unsettling. Isaac frowned, muttering that the system shouldn't have failed. I shrugged it off, eager to cling to the fragile joy of the moment. But when we walked to the parking lot, the world shifted. A van screeched to a halt. Men in masks poured out, moving with terrifying precision. Before I could react, one of them seized my arm, shoving me back against the hood of my car. Isaac shouted, fought, but there were too many. I saw fists, heard the thud of blows against his body, the crack of pain as they forced him down. My scream tore through the night, useless against the violence unfolding before me. "Naomi!" he gasped just before they dragged him toward the van. I lunged forward, but a hand pressed a blade cold against my throat. "Stay back," the masked man growled. I froze helpless as the doors slammed shut and the van sped into the darkness, carrying Isaac away. The silence that followed was unbearable. My guards arrived seconds too late, their radios crackling with frantic calls. I stood trembling, the metallic taste of fear thick in my mouth. My heart pounded not with shock but with certainty. This was David's doing. His promise had not been idle. He had come for blood, and he had taken Isaac to get to me. Hours later the phone rang. A voice I knew too well filled the room, smooth and venomous. "Naomi, did you think you could defy me forever? If you want your stray back, you'll come alone. Midnight. The old warehouse by the docks. No police. No guards. Just you. Otherwise." He let the silence hang, cruel and deliberate. Then the line went dead. I sank into the chair, my hands shaking. Rage and terror warred inside me. Isaac had been broken once already, by lies, by prison, by betrayal. I could not let David destroy him again. But the demand was clear. If I wanted to save him, I would have to walk into the lion's den alone. That night, as I prepared myself, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Gone was the polished CEO draped in silk and steel. What stared back was a woman stripped bare. A woman whose choices would decide whether love lived or died. And I knew there was no turning back. The city was silent as I drove toward the docks, though in truth it was my own heartbeat drowning out every sound. Midnight. The hour when shadows feel thicker than flesh, when even the bravest hesitate. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened, forcing myself to breathe evenly, to remember that fear was exactly what David wanted me to carry into that warehouse. But I was not the woman he had abandoned years ago. I had built an empire from ashes. Tonight I would face him not as a victim but as myself. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking silhouette against the restless waves of the lagoon. Rusted doors groaned as I pushed them open. Inside, the stench of oil and damp concrete mingled with the dim glow of a few scattered lamps. And there he was, David, standing as though he owned the night, his men circling like wolves. My eyes searched for Isaac. He was bound to a chair in the center of the room, his head bowed, blood staining his shirt. The sight nearly undid me. My throat clenched, but I forced my voice steady. "I'm here. Let him go." David's laugh echoed cruelly, bouncing off the metal walls. "Naomi, always so noble. But you still don't understand, everything has a price. Tonight the price is you." He stepped closer, his gun glinting in the half-light. "You'll give me what should have been mine: shares, access, control. Or he dies." Isaac lifted his head weakly, his swollen eyes locking onto mine. Don't give him anything," he rasped. Even broken, even beaten, his spirit stood taller than his body could bear. My chest ached at the strength in his defiance. I took a step forward, refusing to let David see my fear. "You already stole once, David. You left me with nothing and I rebuilt everything without you. Do you think pointing a gun at a broken man will make me surrender what I bled for?" His expression hardened. He pressed the barrel against Isaac's chest, his smile wicked. "Watch me." The air thickened, seconds stretching like eternity. And then sirens. The wail of police vehicles shattered the silence outside, blue lights slicing through the cracks of the warehouse walls. Chaos erupted. David cursed, his men scrambling, shouts filling the air. In that split moment of distraction, Isaac surged against his restraints. With a roar, he broke free enough to lunge forward, knocking the gun from David's hand. The weapon clattered across the floor. I ran toward Isaac, grabbing his arm, pulling him upright as he stumbled. Shots rang out, wild, desperate. Police stormed in, their commands deafening, bullets sparking against metal. David tried to flee, but Isaac, bruised and bleeding, hurled himself at him, dragging him down in a brutal struggle. The two men crashed to the ground, rage against resilience, past against present. I reached for Isaac, shouting his name, but he pushed me back, his voice hoarse. "Naomi, stay safe." His fist struck with the fury of a man reclaiming not just survival but dignity. When the officers finally pulled them apart, David was cuffed, spitting threats through bloodied lips. Isaac collapsed into my arms, his chest heaving, his body trembling from exhaustion. I held him close, whispering into his ear even as tears blurred my vision. "You're safe now. It's over. He'll never hurt you again." But as the police dragged David away, his eyes found mine and his smile, broken but defiant, sent a chill down my spine. "This isn't over, Naomi. Remember that." The morning after the raid at the warehouse, Lagos seemed different to me. The same restless traffic snarled through the streets, the same vendors called out their prices, the same towers glittered beneath the sun, but for the first time in years, I felt as though the city was listening. David had been dragged out of the shadows, exposed before the law, and though my body still trembled with exhaustion, my spirit pulsed with a fragile hope. The trial came swiftly. Men like David always believed their money could delay consequences, but his arrogance had made him sloppy. The police recovered weapons, fraudulent documents, recordings of threats. And then there was me, the woman he had betrayed, the woman whose company he tried to destroy. I stood before the court, my voice firm though my hands trembled, and I told the story without shame. He stole my inheritance. He left me with nothing. And when I rebuilt, he returned to finish what he started. But this time he failed. Across the courtroom, David smirked as though it were all theater. His lawyer rattled arguments about business disputes, about misunderstandings and exaggerations. But then the prosecution brought Isaac to the stand. He limped slowly, his body still healing from the bruises of that night. The room hushed as he raised his hand and swore to speak the truth. His voice was low but steady. I have known betrayal. I have been falsely accused, stripped of my dignity, left with nothing. But what David did to Naomi was not just theft, it was violence. He tried to erase her as others once erased me. I stand here because she saved me, and I will not let lies bury her truth. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Even the judge leaned forward, her eyes sharp, as if she too felt the weight of his words. For the first time, David's mask cracked. He shifted in his seat, his smirk faltering. When the verdict was finally delivered, guilty on charges of fraud, assault, and conspiracy, the air inside the courtroom broke like a dam. David's curses echoed as officers pulled him away, his voice shrill, promising revenge. But his power was gone. For once, justice did not bow to his money. Afterward, I found Isaac waiting for me outside the courthouse, leaning on his cane, the Lego sun painting gold across his weary face. "It's over," I whispered, though the words felt almost too fragile to trust. He shook his head gently. "No, Naomi. It's beginning." And he was right. In the weeks that followed, Agitech recognized Isaac not as a charity case, not as the man who had stumbled from the streets, but as the genius he had always been. The team marveled at his ideas, journalists wrote about his return, and for the first time since prison, he walked into meetings with his head high. The man who had once been forgotten was being remembered, not as a victim but as a builder. At night, when the city quieted and the estate walls sheltered us from the noise, I often found myself watching him. His shoulders straighter, his laughter returning in hesitant bursts, his eyes meeting mine with something deeper than gratitude. And in those moments I felt the truth rise inside me. He was no longer just the stranger who had saved my life on a rain-soaked road. He was becoming the man my heart had not dared to hope for. Yet even in victory, fear whispered. Because when two wounded souls begin to heal together, the world does not always stand aside. Test them again and again. Time moved differently after the trial. The noise of scandal, the glare of headlines, the whispers in boardrooms, they all faded like echoes. What remained was quieter, steadier. Evenings at the estate when Isaac walked through the gardens with a cane but his stride full of determination. Mornings at Agitech when his name appeared on reports beside innovations no one else could have imagined. The world saw him as reborn. But to me he was more than that. He was a man who had pulled himself out of ashes, who had taught me that survival is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. One evening, when the sky burned red over Lagos and the air smelled of rain, Isaac asked me to walk with him. His hand trembled slightly as it slipped into mine, not from weakness but from something deeper, anticipation. He led me to the very place where our paths had first crossed, the roadside near the ditch, still scarred by the memory of that night. The traffic roared past us, oblivious, but for me time stood still. "I've thought about this moment every day," he said softly, his eyes holding mine with a tenderness that shook me. "When I lay in that hospital bed, broken and nameless, I never believed I would stand here again, alive, whole with you by my side. But you gave me more than a second chance, Naomi. You gave me a reason to live." Before I could speak, he reached into his pocket. Not a velvet box, not diamonds screaming of wealth, just a simple silver band, worn smooth, humble but steady. He sank to one knee, his voice breaking. "I was a man lost to betrayal, to injustice, to the streets. You found me. You saw me when the world had erased me. And I love you with everything I have left. Naomi Ajayi, will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision, but my voice was clear. "Yes." The word left my lips not as surrender but as victory. In that moment, the years of scars, the weight of betrayal, the echoes of loneliness, all of it fell away. He rose, sliding the ring onto my finger, and when his arms closed around me, I felt not just love but peace. Peace I had thought impossible. Months later, in a quiet ceremony beneath the jacaranda trees of my estate, we exchanged vows. The air smelled of blossoms, the sky clear and wide, as if the world itself had been cleansed for us. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers who once doubted us watched in silence, as we promised to carry each other's scars and victories alike. Isaac's eyes never left mine. When he whispered, "You are my home," I knew it was the truest thing I had ever heard. And then came the final gift, the one neither of us had dared to dream of. Our son, born with a cry so fierce it seemed to shatter every shadow of our past. I held him against my chest, Isaac's hand steadying mine, and I realized that this child was not a symbol of what we had lost but of what we had built. He was the proof that broken lives can knit together into something whole, something stronger than betrayal, stronger than fear. Looking back, I often think of that night in the rain, when a homeless man threw himself in front of my car. If fate had written it differently, I might have driven past him, never knowing his name, never discovering the soul that would change my own. But destiny does not ask for permission. It forces us to stop, to see, to choose. And I chose him. Now, when the world whispers about me, they do not speak only of the empire I built or the battles I fought. They speak of the woman who found love in the unlikeliest place, who married a man the streets tried to erase, and who raised a family not on wealth alone but on resilience, faith, and hope. Isaac is no longer the stranger who saved me that night. He is my husband, the father of my child, the man of my heart. And together we are living proof that even from betrayal, life can begin again.